will follow you. You are the source of life. I can't be left behind. No one else will do. I will take hold of you. I need you, Jesus. Come to my rescue. Where else can I go? There's no other name by which I am saved. Capture me with grace. I will follow you. My heart is yours for life, and I need your hand in mine. No one else will do. Lord, I put my trust in you. I need you, Jesus. Come to my rescue. Where else can I go? There's no other name by which I am saved. Capture me with grace. I will follow you. This world has nothing for me. 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 I need you, Jesus. Come to my rescue. Where else can I go? There's no other name by which I am saved. Capture me with grace. I will follow you. I need you, Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus. Brother Paul, will you lead us in prayer tonight? Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. The ushers will wait on you at this time.
Jesus, to come to my rescue. Where else can I go? There's no other name by which I am saved. Capture me with grace. I will follow you.
Amen. You may be seated. Happy Thanksgiving.
Praise the Lord. So this is the third week that I am discussing this topic, a nation under God, question mark. I probably have another 2 months worth of material, but I'm probably going to end it tonight. Like I told you, I don't want to turn our Wednesday night Bible study into American history class, and this has already been the third week, so I need to complete my thought that I jumped off of last week, which let me get right back to it. God does have a way of getting His point across, and He does it in one of three ways. He'll send conviction when you don't pay attention to conviction. He'll send the mouth of the prophet. I told you that in this nation, I think that was the Oral Roberts and the Billy Graham's crusades and those that era for our nation. That's when the mouth of the prophet was being professed and proclaimed over this nation, and we didn't listen to them. So the next step that God uses in order to get your attention is judgment. I personally believe there's a lot of pastors out there, and I guess they don't want to speak anything negative or whatever, that positive proclamation kind of belief that they have. They don't want to speak anything negative, but I personally believe we're in a time of judgment, and I'm going to get to that tonight, why I believe that and what's caused it, I believe. Before I begin, let me stress to you that the time of year is here. It is coming and now is, when those that will worship at Promise of Victory may have to fight through the snow to do so. And if the weatherman's right, now he said on the news tonight that we're going to have a colder winter, a longer winter, and 50 inches of snow this winter. So if he's right, if he's not a false prophet, then we're going to have a mess at least a Wednesday or a Sunday at some point. So I always put it on Facebook when we're not having service, but I know everybody's not on Facebook. And if you're not on Facebook, we have Brother Paul who sends out mass texts to everyone that has text messaging. I know everybody doesn't have text messaging. I also have a call service that we will call your house, because some of you are still locked into that way of communication. And that's fine. That's fine. As long as I have your phone number, you'll receive a phone call. I don't want you fighting the wind and the snow and the elements and getting out here and finding out the house is shut up. So make sure that we have your way of communicating with you, either by liking our Facebook page, because I will always put it on Facebook, or get Brother Paul and have, he's in the back, make sure he has your text number if you text, if that's the easier way to communicate, or make sure Sister Tina has your number and she will make sure I get it so that I can put you into the call center. And if you were here last winter and you already went through that and you've already got a call, as long as your number hasn't changed. I've never seen people that gets their numbers changed every couple of months, but every so often I'll get somebody's new their number, and I'm like, I already got their number. No, they changed it. So if you're one of these people that gets a new number every 2 months, I probably don't have your new one, because I haven't put a call out since it snowed last. So make sure we have a way to get a hold of you. I don't want you coming out in bad weather and finding out that the house is not open. So beyond that, let's get back into our lesson. I told you this last week, and there's a reason I brought this up again. I believe we're under the judgment. And again, I hope I've got time to get to why I believe that. Now, I'm going to press through this. If you wasn't here last Wednesday, I don't have time to discuss it again. But I do want to show you what happens when a nation forgets God. This is not me, this is right out of the Bible. Psalm chapter 106. Here's what happens. They wanted something besides God, God gave it to them. They became envious and self-centered. They became idolaters. They grumbled in their tents. They would not obey God. They backslid. Then they got to the place where they could not pray for themselves. This is what happens when a nation backslides. They get to the place where their prayers are ineffective. And when you're in a backslidden condition, you act like God owes you something instead of the other way around. And that's why your prayers are ineffective, because have you noticed how arrogant this nation has gotten the last 30 years with God? I mean, we used to have presidents and governors and people of authority that would get up and ask for prayer, and now we say, no, we're not allowed to pray. We're going to cut God out of what God established Himself. That's arrogance. And when you get to that backslidden, arrogant place, you can't pray because you only pray in case of emergency. You're only praying when the ship's going down, and God doesn't respond to emergency prayers unless you have been giving Him maintenance prayers. Well, that's another sermon for another time. So and what happened when they could no longer pray for themselves? They lost their children. We see that in this day and age, do we not? This generation coming up now, I worry about them. I pray for them every single day. Never before in the history of America have children walked out the back of the church and in such massive numbers and not returned. We're in a bad way if God doesn't do something in this nation. And last but not least, their enemies oppress them. I'm going to get deep into that tonight. That's why I brought that back up. In other words, church, America's hope is not going to come from a new election. I hope you understand that. It's not going to come because they pass some kind of new law. It's not going to come out of a new speech, and it certainly won't come out of any legislation. The legislation that we get passed anymore are so ridiculous. It is absolutely beyond my... we have legislation trying to convince... Now, I just told you that they're going to say that they're telling us that we have we're going to have the worst winter in a long time, but at the same time, they're passing legislation saying that there's global warming. I'd like a chunk of that. I'd vote for the global warming myself. I mean, if it means that I get 60-degree weather all winter, I'm in. But they're trying to pass, they're spending millions of dollars in legislation money trying to convince people that the earth's getting warmer, and at the same time, weatherman's saying, get ready, you're going to get 50 inches of snow this year, and you only got 32 last year. So that's what we spend our money on. And then they pass legislation to force a health care plan on this nation that they themselves won't take. Nobody in Washington took the not so affordable health care act, but it was forced on the rest of us, which caused many people to lose their insurance, which was another lie that was told from a podium, that you won't lose well, no, you won't lose them. They'll just quit carrying you. They got forced out of the picture, and if you don't have health insurance because you can't afford the premiums, well, we're just going to tax you at the end of the year so you can pay for other people who don't have a job and they got insurance and you work every day and can't afford insurance, but they got insurance and they're sitting home eating Cheetos. In other words, church, the Bible tells us that every knee shall bow and every tongue confess. So make no mistake, America, just like any other nation, is coming back to God. And we're either going to do it as an act of love or we're going to do it because of judgment. I told you last Wednesday, last week, and this week's message was going to be, it's all about the money. I want to talk to you about the money in America because that is the forefront of most people's imagination and what they voted for, and let's be honest, it's a big deal in all of our lives. Genesis chapter 37 through 50 is the story of Joseph. And Joseph, according to Genesis, Joseph was the son of Jacob, and he was forced through circumstances that he had nothing to do with. It was actually divine providence by God. He was forced down to Egypt. Now, why was Joseph in Egypt? Because had he not been in Egypt, Israel would have died. Israel would have perished had Joseph not been forced down to Egypt. Now, Genesis chapter 47, we're coming along a little later in the story. Joseph is already in Egypt. He's already established as the prime minister of Egypt. And what happens in Genesis chapter 47 is his father, Jacob, and his family are in Egypt. And it's the land of the area of Goshen, which was the best of the land. Because Joseph was the prime minister, he blessed his daddy. And he gave his daddy the best of the land. But notice what happens in verses 12 through 15. Joseph nourished his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread according to their families. And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore. There was what? No bread in the land because there was a famine. That means nobody had bread. But we know Egypt had bread. Why? Because Joseph was there. And Joseph was given the ability to interpret dreams. And when he got a dream that there was going to be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of lean, he was smart enough to put 2 and 2 together. And Egypt now is set up because Joseph was there. Notice what happens, though. The famine was very sore. This is the land of Egypt, and all the land of Canaan fainted by the reason of the famine. The land of Egypt is hungry. And everybody else is hungry. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan for the corn which they brought. And Joseph brought the money to Pharaoh's house. And when money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, in other words, everybody was broke. All the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence?" And it says it again, "For the money faileth." The money is gone. And when the money is gone and people can't eat, people get desperate. How do you think that the Antichrist is going to talk people into taking the mark of the beast? And I've heard preachers misinterpret Revelations for years and act like that they're going to trick people into taking the mark of the beast. That is in no way, shape, or form going to happen. God's not going to let people get tricked into hell. That would not happen. They will have to willfully take the mark of the beast either on the forehead or on the back of their hand. And why would people do that? Because when you're hungry, you get desperate. And when there is no food, people do irrational things. Now notice what this scripture says. There is a time of global crisis, and everybody came to Egypt for help. Why Egypt? Because God had set Egypt up to prosper, because He put His man there, and He had a plan for His man. Now America, since World War II, has been the wealthiest, most powerful nation on the planet. Why? Because God had a plan and a purpose for this nation. And everybody always looks to America in times of national crisis. When the economy falls worldwide, when there's famine in Africa, they don't look to Germany, they don't look to Finland, they don't look to Canada, they look to America. There's a reason for that, and I'll get to it in a minute. But I want to focus on this right here for a moment. For the money failed. There is I began my college life in accounting. I was an accounting major. And there's some basic economics that you need to understand before we get into the rest of this lesson. Number one, the money failed. What does that affect? Supply and demand. Now, what does supply and demand affect? Well, let's look at it. When supply is high and demand is low, you got plenty of it, but nobody wants it. You can't get rid of it. You go into Walmart and they got a rack of things that they've marked discount, clearance, 99 cents, and they got 5,000 of them. There's a reason they're on clearance. They couldn't sell them for $10. So they marked them down to 99 because they had a large supply but a very small demand, so that makes the price go down. However, when supply is limited or low, but there's a lot of demand for it, every year there's a Christmas toy that parents lose their minds for. Remember Cabbage Patch Dolls? When I was a kid, it was Cabbage Patch. I still remember on the 6 o'clock news watching a woman get busted in the mouth at a Toys R Us because they was fighting over the last Cabbage Patch doll that Toys R Us had. I still remember that. And since then, there's been all kinds. There was the Talking Elmo or the Laughing Elmo, Tickle Me Elmo, whatever that thing was. This year's it's something called a Hatchimal, or and you can't find them, and everybody's selling them for $200 a piece. They buy them for $40 and sell them for $200. And that's supply and demand. When the stores don't have it and your kid wants it, the price goes up. That's basic economics. What happens when what happens in the meanwhile is something called inflation. Now, inflation controls how much is being spent on something. We are under control in this world to something called OPEC. Now, I read several years ago, I read a National Geographic article, and it was about 8 pages long. It was pretty intense. It took me a while to dissect this thing. But basically what they discovered was America has enough oil in Alaska and through the Midwest that we don't even pipe, by the way, that we don't even bring it to the surface. It's just under there. And we have just under Iowa and Idaho and Montana and in Alaska, we have enough oil that if we were to get it out of the ground and put it in refineries, gasoline in America would be so cheap because the supply would be so high that you could buy a gallon of gas cheaper than you could buy a bottle of water. But because OPEC controls how much oil is brought out of the ground, we leave it in the ground and we keep paying $2.29 or whatever it is, and then every once in a while we get up to about $3.60 and everybody's complaining and talking about riding bicycles, but nobody ever does. Now what happens? We've got something called inflation, and then when it gets real bad, there's a part that kicks in that's called hyperinflation. Now let me just give you an example of hyperinflation. In Germany, after World War II, hyperinflation kicked in. Again, I don't want to turn this into a world history class either. But England and France demanded that Germany pay war retribution for everything that they had destroyed in World War I. And America backed them up. So Germany had to start paying out millions and trillions of dollars, and they didn't have it. So what happened was the German mark basically became worthless. As a matter of fact, you see here kids making kites out of money because the paper it was printed on wasn't worth anything. And here's a woman throwing German marks into her fireplace because it was cheaper to burn money than it was to buy wood because of hyperinflation. There was during that period of time, a wheelbarrow full of marks was enough to buy you one loaf of bread. So that's what happens when hyperinflation kicks in. Now, if you really want to know the end result of that, there was a guy you may have heard of named Adolf Hitler who came along at that very time, and he canceled all the money, printed new money with his picture on it, and became a national hero. Because people do desperate things in desperate hours. There have been discussions in this world, whether you know it or not, for a long time for new money. That's one of the reasons they have attacked In God We Trust. Because they want a new worldwide money. And if we're not going to go worldwide, they at least want a national, they want one for the Americas. They want Canada, America, Mexico, and South America to all share the same currency. They want to print new money. Now, during this period of time, this was when the world was in crisis, just like the world was in crisis in Joseph's day. And I know that in America we have been spoiled for so long, we think, well, that could never happen here. Unfortunately, I'm going to prove to you it absolutely will happen again. Because Revelation teaches us in chapter 6, verses 5 and 6, that when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, "Come and see," and beheld a low black horse, and him that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see that thou not hurt the oil." And you know what that means? A penny is a denarius. That's a whole day's wage. So you're going to work all day long and be able to afford a loaf of bread. That's what's going to happen. And this is not past, this is future tense. This is prophetic that is out in front of us. It absolutely is at some point going to happen in America and all around the globe where there's going to be a national economic crisis. And in Genesis chapter 47, here's what it says about Egypt and the rest of the world. When they got down to Joseph, it says that they sold everything that they had to the government. their houses, their land, and everything they own to the government. Do you remember a few years ago when the government was bailing out the banks? You realize that the government foreclosed on a lot of houses in 2008. Because when the money fails, you'll give up everything to eat. Even if it means giving up your family farm, even if it means giving up the house that you already have mostly paid for and you just got a few more payments on the mortgage, if you have to eat, you'll do what you have to do, even if it means giving the government your land and your house. Now, I suppose the first question, if we're going to ask if this is a Christian nation, if we need to answer is, what's a Christian nation look like? For that matter, what does a Christian look like? Because that's pretty ambiguous today. People, when I was a little kid, people that went to church were Christians, and you could tell that they were Christians. Anymore, the name Christian is spread so far and wide, I don't even know what it means anymore. I mean, if I stood up here in front of you and said, I'm a giraffe, I can't pull that off. My neck's not long enough. But I can stand up here and tell you I'm a Christian and then go out in the parking lot and cuss you so bad a fly wouldn't land on you. And you wouldn't know no difference if you didn't catch me in the parking lot. Now you know immediately I'm not a giraffe. Notice what's happening in America. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. This was a bad election year. I say it was a bad election year because people really got vicious and hateful, mean-spirited, and it literally ripped people apart during this national election. And this is one of the reasons why. Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunks, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. Now, please understand what I'm about to say. There's more sins listed right here than homosexuality. But right now, the only drum that's being beaten is that one. Okay? The world is against the church, especially in America right now. The America's government and everybody that's what we call on the left, and there's a lot of people that claim to be on the right that has also taken a stand against the church when it comes to this. And they say America, or the church is outdated, and the Constitution's outdated, and the laws are outdated, so we got to change, and we got to change what marriage is. We got to change the definition of what a family is. We got to change. You can't use pronouns anymore because we've got people that gets their feelings hurt if you call them a he because you've known them for 40 years and they've always been he, but now they identify as something else. And if you call them he now, so we can't even go around in the supermarket and when the little girl's checking you out, you say, "Are you married?" Yeah, you can't say, "Well, what's your husband's name?" Because now you could be in all kinds of. Well, who said I was married to a man? I mean, there's all kinds of things that have changed, and it's warped my mind so bad I don't even want to talk to people anymore because I'm afraid I'm gonna hurt somebody. You say good day, ma'am, and if they don't identify as a ma'am, you might be in trouble. And they say, well, the church hates homosexuals, and nothing can be farther from the truth. We love them so much, we tell them the truth. We love them so much that we know what the Bible says, and we understand that this is not outdated. This is not apropos. This is not something that is done away with. God did not stutter. And so we love. There's two lines of thinking and they're both wrong. One is if you don't support it, you hate it. And the other is, if you do support it, you love it. And neither one of them are accurate. Because I support everybody, but I don't love any sin. Any sin. And I want you to understand, there's a lot of sins right here. The only reason that the church seems to be taking a stand against homosexuality is because that one happens to be the one that the government right now is running down our throat. If they ever come out with a law, because notice what it says right here, or drunkards. If they ever lifted the law on drunk driving and said from now on you can go around and just beat the fenders off of you and all the people on the road, we're no longer going to consider it against the law to be drunk driving. I would hope the church would rise up against that too. I mean, I would hope that they would, if they ever said it's no longer illegal for you to be a thief. You can take whatever you want to. If you like it, take it. But see, there's no government sanction against against us disproven thievery is wrong. They agree with us you shouldn't steal. They even have laws. If you don't think that they agree that stealing's wrong, talk to the IRS. You'll get more time for not giving the IRS their share than if you killed somebody. Because they believe stealing is wrong, but they don't believe homosexuality is wrong. So that's the one that they are imposing on us. So we have to oppose what they impose. The only reason we're making so much noise about that one is because that's the one that the government at this time is trying to force into pulpits and force mouths to be shut about the situation. And if you wonder what happened during this election and why the numbers were so close and why does it seem like the pendulum is swinging, I'm going to show you actually something that scared me to death. I know you cannot read this, but I'm going to give you over here what it says. In 2017, there was 178 million supposed Christians in America. Okay, 78% of the population. Now, I don't have time to get into the fact that I don't believe that for a minute. On any given Sunday, 78% of Americans ain't serving God. Okay? But what I am telling you is that there was at least 178 million people. 78% of the American population identified themselves as a Christian. 7 years later, we only had 173 million. Now, that's 71% of the population. The bigger problem is not only do we have a decline, the bigger problem is the population grew. And we are now down 5 million in America who identify themselves as Christians. The Bible says there's going to be a great falling away as the end draws near. There's going to be a time where people are going to be lovers of themselves, not lovers of God. They're going to be boasters, and they're going to be rebellious, and all these things that Paul warned Timothy of. But it says that there's going to be a great falling away. So in other words, the population is growing, but America is losing Christians faster than they're making babies. That tells you that there is a liberal movement in this world that is, and in this nation. Now, how are we tested in this time? We're tested by temptation, we're tested by persecution, and we're tested by tribulation. Those are the things that test us. That's what's making people fall away. Now, I happen to have an issue with this generation, not just because they no longer identify themselves as Christians, but I have a problem with the entitlement that everybody seems to have. You know, the people that show up at rallies and say, I've never been told no. People that were given trophies just because they participated their whole life, and now they expect you to give them a job and make them the president just because they signed an application. You know, the kind of people that don't get grades on tests because F's make people feel sad. You know, you don't have to study anymore because the teacher don't want to flunk you, because if they flunk you, it might hurt your self-esteem and you won't grow up to be somebody important. And the little kids are calling their mama cuss words because they have freedom of speech and nobody's willing to correct them anymore because we might stifle their growth as a human. And I will say it until I am blue in the face. I am thankful I was raised the way that I was raised and in the time that I was raised in. We used to use terms like ma'am and sir. When I grew up, we said please and thank you, and we wouldn't dare look at our parents cross-eyed and expect them to do what we wanted them to do. If we didn't study when I was in school, we failed. Plain and simple. If we didn't go to practice, we didn't get to play in the game because you didn't do your end of your bargain. If we didn't win, we didn't get a trophy just for trying. The people who won got the awards, and everybody else went home and you cried a little bit and you got better because of it. Amen? If we talk back to our parents, we probably got the back of our mama's hand a time or two, because she was tired of listening to her mouth. If we acted up in school, we got took out in the hallway, and I got told more than one time, bend over and touch your toes. If we didn't like dinner, we didn't eat. Mama didn't go out to Taco Bell because her baby don't want to eat what she put on the table. If we was late for curfew, we got grounded. If we lied, we got our toys taken away. If we misbehaved in the neighborhood mamas would discipline us, call back to the house, and Mama would be waiting with a switch when we got there. And if we didn't get hired for the job, we went and looked for another one. We didn't sue somebody because they didn't want to hire us. I was not handled with kid gloves. I was put out on a bicycle with no pads, no helmet, and nobody watching me. And my parents let me fall. Why? Because I learned when you fall, you get back up. I was told no, and I was told no often. I was told no loudly. She didn't care if we was in the middle of a department store. I could lay in the floor and pitch a fit. I still wasn't getting that toy, and it wasn't going home with me because no meant no. And it wasn't about my parents trying to be my friend. It was tough love. Why? Because life is tough. We're raising such little snowflakes. They're so tender. Can't be told no for nothing. I don't want a bunch of entitled, spoiled brats running the country. Because I promise you, I'm not raising them like that everywhere else in this world. We had grit. And the reason we had grit was because we was allowed to fail. Teachers told you no, and they meant it, and you sat down and had respect. And now everything becomes a video on YouTube or Vine or something, and everybody's out to get somebody in trouble. And there wasn't no such thing as adults getting in trouble when I was a kid. When I was a kid, if you misbehaved in school, you got it at school, and you got it when you went home, and you came back to school and told the teacher promptly, "I'm sorry," and it won't happen again. Now you get in trouble at school, Mom and Dad comes down and fusses at the teachers. We have flipped our wigs. We're out of our minds. And right now we're being forced as the church to push back against legislature that is trying to make us conform to this world. So there's no such thing as a drunk agenda yet, but there is a homosexual agenda, and it's coming fast and furious. So too much is at stake for us to just sit and be quiet. We're not simply against homosexuality. We're against any sin that keeps people out of heaven. Hello? We're against any sin that keeps people from enjoying what God's got for them. And it just so happens right now that's the one that's getting all the press. The issue is sin, and that's what we're against. Now, I don't personally understand it. I do understand people who get drunk. I do understand people who steal. I don't understand homosexuality. I don't understand. Listen, I'm just saying I don't understand it. Okay? I don't understand it. The Bible says God formed man. He built woman. And that word formed means he carved. So he formed man. He's like a box and straight lines. He built women. And how any man could look at this and my straight lines, pass by a whole sea of women and want me, I don't get it. I don't get it. 200 years, that's about how long a great civilization usually lasts. 200 years. Most great civilizations run their course in the span of 200 years. We are over that time limit. And they start, at 200 years, they start comparing us to other nations that were once great like us but have also fallen. And there's a book written, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And in that, and there's a lot of reasons why we compare America and Rome. We were both superpowers. We both have occupations in the Middle East. We both had dealings with Israel. We both had a Capitol Hill where a Senate would meet. We had two main political parties. Both of us used eagles as emblems. Both of us had wars over slavery. Both of us passed laws that allowed the killing of infants. That is not a new issue. That thing's been around for many, many years. There's been a lot of correlation over the years between us and the Roman Empire. And in that book, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, they outline 5 reasons that great civilizations or great nations fall. One is the undermining of the sanctity of the home. I told you in week 1, that was 2 weeks ago, how there was a communist movement as far back as the 1930s that wanted to disrupt the home because they realized that getting mom out of the home and sending mom to work would put them in control of the kids. They wanted kids in front of television sets where they could teach them what they wanted to know. Higher taxes. Can I hear somebody say amen? So when taxes, our problem is not that we don't have enough money in our government. It's when we give it to the legislatures, they want to spend it all and then come back to us and want some more for it. Let me put it this way. If you had a company that you had put $20 trillion in debt, you'd have been in jail a long time ago. But we're allowed to run this country with that kind of freelancery, and nobody says anything. Number 3, craze for pleasure and sporting events. Well, I'll tell you what, this, as bad as this election was, didn't slow down football Sunday, did it? Boy, everybody was losing their mind over Trump or Hillary, Trump or Hillary. All right, and come Sunday, go Steelers. We have a craze for pleasure and sporting events. We'll drop everything. How many families are going to be neglected tomorrow? Because it's family time until the football kicks off. And then, shh, I can't hear what they're saying. Shh, families in there playing games, having fun. Shh, trying to watch the game. So we got family in here acting up. We got the dad in here turning the remote up, trying to get the game up louder. So now we're having a loud building big armaments when the real decay is inside the country. We've got military bases all around this globe, but our big problems are right here at home. Same thing happened in the Roman Empire. Same thing happened with Greece. Why do I bring that up? Because this is the biggest problem. I just showed you we've lost 5 million in 7 years. We've lost 5 million United States citizens, even though the population has increased 14%. We lost 7 million in 7 years. So we actually have smaller percentage. We only have 71% of the American population now that says they identify themselves as Christians. Because there is a decline right now, a decay of religious faith. This America that once served God and was founded on His principles no longer wants to claim Him as Lord. And that's a problem. We've been saying since, now this was before my time, but some of you remember the oil embargo. Some of you remember gas being rationed. Okay? We've been saying since then that we need independence from foreign oil. And yet we've got people, boy, I about said something about classified them and stuff. We got people in this nation that fights harder for baby seals and trees than we do low gas prices, because we might uproot an ant or have a worm go extinct while we drill oil out of our own. So we want to get away from foreign oil, and God put a bunch underneath us and we won't even suck it out of the ground. We've been saying since the Kennedy administration that somebody needs to come up with a way for Americans to be able to afford health care. And then we get this mess forced down our throat 3 years ago that apparently is going to get blown up, and we're going to be starting all over again. So we've been working on this for 40 years, and it shouldn't be that difficult. It shouldn't be that hard for them to have come to an agreement. But the problem is you got too many legislators that have money in their pocket that come from big pharmaceutical companies. And so they're not going to pass any legislation that's going to hurt them. So because they're all swapping money back and forth, you and me get to pay for it. How many times have you heard this? We need better education in our schools. The problem is they won't give you a voucher so you can pay for your kid to go to the school you want them to go to. If they really wanted to get a higher education, for our kids, they would give you a voucher where you could take them to a Christian school and get them a better qualified education. But they don't want that because they want your kids. They want to teach them that we came from monkeys. They want to teach them that Teresa's got 2 mommies and it's okay. And I'm sorry, but they want your kids 7 hours a day for 9 months a year. And so if you're going to put them in private school, you're going to have to fit the bill. They're not really intending to give them a higher quality education. They just want to give them their education. One of the covenants God established with Israel was Deuteronomy chapter 8. He says, but please, when you come into this land that I'm going to give you, remember that it was God that gives you power to get wealth. So that when I establish my covenant with you, you won't forget it was me. You didn't have anything until I gave it to you. That's one of the promises and the covenants God made. He made a covenant with wealth with the Hebrew nation. And he said, you're going to have vineyards you didn't plant. I'm going to give you houses you didn't build. I'm going to give you wells that you don't have to dig. I'll just give it to you because I love you. But please, when I give it to you, don't forget it was me that blessed you. And God has blessed this nation as well. Now look what Deuteronomy 15:6 says. For the Lord thy God bless thee as he blessed thee, and thou shalt lead, and you shall lend to many nations, and you will not borrow. And you shall reign over many nations, and they shall not reign over thee. God blessed America like this right here. Hello? Since World War II, nations have come to America for us to give them money. And there's 4 reasons that God's favor has been on this nation. You ready for this? Now, we know why God loves Israel. They were his chosen people since the beginning. There was no reason for God to love America, so we had to give him one. And this, we gave him 4. We were the leading nation for years to proclaim the gospel. We sent missionaries around the world consistently. You know what's sad? Now other nations are sending missionaries here. England and Germany now have missionaries that are coming here to preach the gospel to us because now we are becoming a mission nation. Number 2, we were the leading nation to help the poor and the needy. We set up orphanages. We set up widows' houses. And we ministered to people because we had compassion. It has completely turned. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, the government still helps the poor and the needy. The only poor and the needy the government wants to support now are people that will vote for them, keep them in power so that they will stay poor for the rest of their life and they'll always vote the party line. They don't want to help people they don't want people going to work. They don't want people to be empowered because if you get empowered, you don't need the government in your life as much. It goes back to Pharaoh. Number 3, we were the leading nation to support Israel in the last 2 years. We've decided we don't need to help Israel anymore, and we've actually taken the side of the Palestinians, which don't even biblically exist, by the way. Number 4, we were the leading nation to promote moral absolutes. You know why the world hated us? Because we were moral. The communists decided they had to attack us from the inside because they knew that morality was one of our greatest assets. It kept us together. We didn't let sinful ways like communism, thoughts, a godless religious, a godless governmental system come in and rule us because we were moral people. Well, we're not anymore. So the 4 reasons that we gave God to have favor on us, we are going back on all 4 of them right now. We're breaking the very things that caused God to love us and to have favor over us. And God says if we turn our back on him and forsake him and mock him, Leviticus chapter 26 says that we're going to lose his favor. Any nation that turns away from God will lose the favor of God. And here's the consequences of losing his favor. Number 1, Leviticus chapter 26, 15 to 16 says he will appoint terror over you. Do you remember the Boston bombing? You remember when the towers came down? That had never happened on American soil before. They would not have dared come here and attack us on our own home ground. Now they are. Now there's subways blowing up, buses blowing up, snipers go and attack school children. Why? Because When we leave God, terror comes over us. Deuteronomy 28:44, we'll become borrowers instead of lenders. We used to be the world's economic lender. Do you remember a few years ago when everybody got those stimulus checks and they were tickled to death? Remember that? Know where that money came from? China. I'll get to that in a minute. Deuteronomy 28:43, strangers will rise higher than you. Have you noticed most of the people in this nation, when they put out the Forbes Fortune 400 list, most of the people that are wealthy, I mean extremely wealthy in this nation, weren't born here? They're strangers to this land. They come here and they amass enormous wealth, but they're not with us. They're not part of us. They came strangers. Deuteronomy 28:51, we will lose land to natural disasters. That one's self-explanatory, and I think that we see more hurricanes now than I've ever seen in my life. We're having to go outside the United States and borrow money from other nations to finance our problems. That's an issue. We borrowed all that money from the Chinese bank. Do you know China and Japan own large amounts of U.S. treasuries? And I hope they never cash them in, because we will be in deep trouble. We owe a debt in this nation of $20 million. I'm going to show you here in a moment. It's $20 trillion. And if they ever call the notes that we owe to each one of them, which is about $500 million apiece, if they ever call those notes, we will be financially bankrupt within 30 minutes if the Chinese government wants their money back. When Babylon was a world power, you've seen this before. I probably shouldn't even get into this. You've seen me use Nebi up here before. Okay, this is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in Daniel chapter 2. We know that the head of gold represents Babylon. We know that the breast of silver represents Persia. The thighs of brass represents Greece. We know the legs of iron represent Rome. But when you think about it monetarily, look at it like this. When Babylon was a world power, it loaned money to the Persians at a rate of 33.5% interest. Countries lending to countries. Okay, that sounds like a good idea, don't it? 33.5%. That's better than your car. I mean, they're really raking it in. But here's the problem. When a nation can't afford to pay its debt, it has to attack the other nation. So the Persians attacked the Babylons, and guess what? Debt canceled. So the Persians didn't learn from that. They started on to the Greeks. And somebody named Alexander the Great come along, and he attacked Persia and conquered the whole known world and canceled their debt. Well, Greece stayed in power for a number of years until they started loaning money to the Romans, and the Romans came along and conquered the whole world and took all the gold, including all the gold that was in the temple of God in Jerusalem. Because a nation that is in debt only has one solution to get out of an enormous debt, and that's to fight their way out. Wars make money for bankers. There was a bank supporting, in World War II, there was one bank that was supporting the Allies and Hitler, loaning money to both of them and getting money back on both ends. Thomas Jefferson said, I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous than our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issues of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around the banks will deprive the people of all their property until their children wake up homeless on their continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people where the property belongs. So here's the problem, and it's a big one. I got this last week because I thought I was going to get here. There's a running clock on the internet. You can find out what our nation owes. Now this was last Wednesday. It's went up some since then. Our federal debt is $19,840,574,291. I'm sorry. And don't forget the 1 cent. The amount is the gross outstanding federal debt issued by the United States Department of the Treasury since 1790. We have been accruing debt since 1790. We've never been out of debt. We thought we were such a world power. We've never been out of debt. We've been in debt to somebody somehow since 1790. But it doesn't include state and local debt. You throw in state and local debt, that number goes up. Doesn't also include what's so-called agency debt. And it doesn't include so-called unfunded liabilities of entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare. So if you throw in all those numbers, we're well over $20 trillion in debt. The federal debt per person right now, you and I owe $60,805 apiece to this debt. I dare say there ain't very many of you in here that would make that in a year. And yet we each owe that much to the federal debt to help pay it off. At the end of fiscal year 2017, the total government debt in the United States, including federal, state, and local, was expected to be $23.277 trillion. That's next fiscal year end. I need to show you. I'm not going to have time to finish all this, but can I keep you just a few more minutes? I want to show you something. I don't want to bore you to death, but you need to know it's all about the money. There's a reason the devil's running rampant against America. He wants to break the back of America, and the only way to really do it is to bring us to our knees, is to ruin us economically. Now pay attention to this. One of the reasons that America is no longer what it used to be is because a lot of our success has been fake. It's been a facade. We have a debt-based economy, which means we have more debt than we do cash. Let me explain that to you. In 1913, we gave a private bank all of the control over our money. It's called the Federal Reserve, which, by the way, it's not federal and it has questionable reserves in it. But we gave them the ability to cause inflation, cut prices, cut the inflation, the rates of inflation. All of that comes from the Federal Reserve, which is a bunch of individual, filthy rich bankers who have interest all over the world, and they're the ones making money every time that interest rate goes up or down a little bit. And we gave them control over all of the national finances. So we have roughly a $20 trillion debt. But that's not the only problem. When you go and you study economics, you study accounting, you learn that there's something called MZM, which is money zero maturity. Here's what that is. That's the money that you have on you. That's the money you've got on you. That's the money I have. That's the money in your pocket. You're walking around money. It's also the money in your checking account. It's the money that you have in a savings account. Okay? All Americans have some sort of money. And when they add all of that, the MZM, the money zero maturity, when they add all of that up, we have a $20 trillion debt, but we only have $8 trillion actual dollars. We have an $18 trillion problem. Because if China and Japan ever come looking for what they owe, where's the money going to come from? Because if they took all the money that we actually physically have, we're still in the hole $18 trillion. So we have a huge problem, and they just keep spouting numbers about the unemployment rate is down this much, and people think everything's okay, and we're not okay. It's a facade. The money we have is $8 trillion. If you put all of our money together, and it's nowhere near what we owe. The reason I bring all that to your attention is this. Satan would love to see America come under a curse and the favor of God lift from it. Why? Because he doesn't want us supporting Israel. He doesn't want us sending missionaries out. He doesn't want us to be a Christian nation. Here's what the devil figured out a long time ago, which is much smarter than most Christian people that I've ever encountered. When the enemy can't curse a family or a person or a nation or a thing because you're under the blood, What he tries to do is get you to cause yourself to get cursed because you get God angry at you. See, when he can't get into your house, he tries to get you angry. Because if you bring a spirit of anger in, now he has a portal into your house. You were under the blood, and he couldn't cross the bloodline. But if you start watching porn at night, he's got a way into that. Y'all ain't going to help me. But see, he would love to see America brought down. And how's he going to do it? We were a Christian nation. We were under the blood. We were sending missionaries out. We were supporting Israel. So he had to cut all of that off. Why? Because he couldn't curse us, so he had to cause us to make God angry and God's judgments to come upon the nation. Well, Pastor, I don't believe that's the way it works when you haven't read your Bible. It happened to Job. Job had a hedge of protection. But when God's hedge lifted, all of a sudden the Chaldeans and the Sabians came in and took everything Job had. They couldn't do it as long as God's hedge was up. But when God lifted his hedge, the enemies came in and took it all. Acts chapter 7, 17 and 19 says, but when the time of the promise drew nigh, when the time of the promise was close, that God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt till another which did not know Joseph, and the same dealt wisely with them, and evil entreated their father, so that they cast out their young children to the end they may not live. I don't have time to get too deep into this. Just pay attention to that statement, when the time of the promise drew close. When it was time for God to get them out of Egypt, when it was time for the promise to happen, which was to leave Egypt, they couldn't go because Egypt was in them. And one of the reasons that the devil wants to get so much of the world in us is because when God says it's time to go, we won't be ready either. Because when he gets ready to get us out of Egypt and call us home, if we're so in love with this present world that we're not ready because we've got the world in us, there's going to be a big escape for some people, and others are going to be left wondering, where did all them people go? Pastor, is that really it's going to be? Yeah, the Bible says two will be in the field. One will be taken, one will be left. They'll be sleeping in the bed. One will be taken and one will be left. And everybody's going to be wondering, where in the world did they go? And it's because when God gets ready for his people to go, his people have to be ready to let go of anything that's holding them back. I apologize. I didn't finish, but I'm going to quit right there because I'm already past my time limit. I appreciate you having patience with me. Brother Ryan, would you mind standing up and giving us a word of prayer, brother?